a very, very short time to say many things that are, I think, important. And I would like to begin with personal experience about apartheid, which I think is much more important to attest to that state than all the, articles that you can read in music. Closer? Yeah. Okay. All right. I was born in Haifa after Israel was established in 1948. By then, over 500 Palestinian villages had been destroyed and depopulated. Prior to that, villagers who had inherited agricultural skills and indigenous knowledge from previous generations transformed their village lands into beautiful and bountiful places that yielded grains, fruits, and vegetables. There were also thriving and growing Palestinian industries. Before 1948, Palestinian Jaffa oranges reached far away into world markets. In the rush and frenzy of ethnic cleansing, the Zionist militias left fragments that attested to the Palestinian places that had once throbbed with life, such as a cactus shrub, a wall belonging to a school, or a harvest that was reaped by the newcomers. But they also unintentionally perhaps left a small fragment of the indigenous population. In 2004, Benny Morris would express his regret that Ben-Gurion did not finish the job and complete the ethnic cleansing. The debris and scenes of cold-blooded massacres were subsequently covered with trees, many of them brought from Europe, enabling Israel to market itself through the Jewish National Fund as a green country that made the desert bloom. In cities and towns, with the exception of Nazareth, most of the Palestinian inhabitants were also expelled. And their erstwhile homes were occupied by the settlers who confiscated their furniture, books, clothes, and even their family photographs and children's toys. Not far from our home in Haifa lived an Arab Jewish family originally from Yemen. In later years, I would often wonder how they felt living in stolen homes. I would question if and how and when the family shed their Arab Yemeni heritage, and why Yossi, the son, felt empowered to call me a dirty Arab. My childhood memories are imprisoned in particular and shredded places. There were colonies, misnamed socialist kibbutzim, and vast tracts of land that we Palestinian Arabs dare no longer tread upon. In Israel's legal system, the vast areas of Palestinian land stolen in 1948 became the eternal property of the Jewish people. A whole legal edifice was constructed, refined, and modified, not to align with international law, but to adapt to the key Zionist precepts, namely, to maintain Jewish control of the expropriated land and expand further to make it impossible for the Palestinian refugees to return or to reclaim their property, and to systematically try to get rid of as many more Palestinians as possible. Palestinian Arabs were placed under military rule to snuff out our resistance, basic liberties, and initiate a process of dehumanization that continues until today. In our segregated schools, we were forbidden to learn our own history and forced to close down and to celebrate the establishment of the Jewish state on the 15th of May. That is our catastrophe. My father, like all other Palestinians, had to get a permit to visit his own family in another town. I shudder to think how he and Palestinians of his generation must have felt standing in front of a newly arrived European settler to ask for a permit to move from one place to another in a land he and his ancestors had traversed for centuries. The settlers acquired absolute power to stop us from living our lives as Palestinians, to shoot and kill villagers who attempted to return home. In the Israeli Orwellian language, these small farmers were called infiltrators. Many more new racist laws have been passed since then, and many more lands and villages continue to suffer from Jewish settler encroachment, some under the insidious title of economic development. If anything, racism has become more blatant. Only yesterday, the Afikim Bus Company began operating Palestinian-only bus lines from the checkpoints to Gush Dan because their presence was upsetting Jewish passengers. I began with this introduction to make a point that apartheid is something natives learn through experience. It becomes manifest when we attempt to live a normal life, live as humans with equal access to space, to rights, to life, but are prevented from doing so. The documentary accurately reveals the shocking and valid comparisons made between the apartheid regimes in Israel and South Africa before it was dismantled. The similarities are impossible to deny, but I want to point out just some features that are specific to the Zionist model. In South Africa, the apartheid regime and its controlling grid enabled the exploitation of African cheap labor. Africans were placed at the bottom of the hierarchical scale. That is, Africans were incorporated into the apartheid system, albeit at the bottom. In the Zionist state, we can speak of two coexisting hierarchical systems. First, there is an Israeli Jewish class society influenced or infused with a racist ideology. For example, American and Western European Jews generally occupy a higher economic and social status compared to East European Jews, and both look down on Oriental Jews or the Sephardim, who are lower in the hierarchy, as less civilized. Israel exerted tremendous efforts trying to estrange and alienate Oriental Jews from their Arab roots. There are other groups like the Falasha or the Ethiopian Jews who encounter horrendous discrimination. Nonetheless, all Jews are accepted as citizens of the state, worthy of benefits and rights, but not the Palestinian Arabs, who are the other, those whose bare life, to use Agamben's term, is outcast from the whole Jewish body. In the case of the refugees, they were automatically denationalized. In the West Bank and Gaza, they are bereft of citizenship altogether. Within 48, their citizenship rights are diminished, contingent, uncertain, and dependent on fulfilling a Jewish humanity and rights first. Another distinction is that Palestinians have to contend with two very powerful narratives that work simultaneously, rendering it difficult to reach Western audiences. First, the history of the Holocaust, where Western guilt and anti-Semitism combined in ways that favored Zionism against the Palestinians. The creation of a Jewish state was seen as a redemptive event, but herein lies the conundrum, because European anti-Semitism cannot be forgiven by enabling ethnic cleansing and colonial settlement on another people's land. Anti-Semitic Europeans, on the other hand, were reluctant to allow Jews to immigrate to their countries. The second narrative is that of the Bible and the biblical stories that are instrumentalized to obtain sympathy with the Israeli state. Thus, the fact that the colonizing European Jews of the mid-20th century have nothing to do with the Hebrew tribes that roamed in Palestine some 2,000 years ago, as Shlomo Sand said, or that Palestinians are much more likely to be the descendants of these ancient Jews, are arguments that are not allowed to circulate widely in the public sphere. Third, the Palestinians encounter a powerful media machine that promotes the official Israeli line and reinforces Orientalist images about Arabs and Muslims, about terrorism and terrorists. The Palestinian history and memory survives, but silently, in the interstices of society, and stands against walls made up of thousands of embedded journalists who are complicit with power, very few of them daring to challenge the Israeli story. Whereas the anti-apartheid struggle of South Africa had solidarity and support from many progressive organizations and leftists in the world, Canada included. It is difficult for Palestinians to even get the status of victims and are often regarded as the terrorists. Israel's apartheid system is much more sophisticated and avoids petty apartheid whenever possible, but makes sure that only 3% or less of historic Palestine within the 48 borders, for example, is available for Palestinians. The rest is forbidden and inaccessible. But that facade quickly dismantles when one becomes aware that not a single new Arab town or village had been built since 1948, while hundreds of new Jewish colonies were built and continue to expand perpendicularly and horizontally on Palestinian landscape. Apartheid is a manifestation and a symptom of settler colonial states. It did not begin in 1967, rather in 1948, and its ideological sources even prior to that. Its aim was to expel the indigenous population and rewrite Palestine's history as Jewish. The fundamental cause of the Palestinian tragedy then is displacement and exile. Consequently, the key focus of struggle is or should be the refugees' right of return, the core issue in the Palestinian national struggle. The Israeli apartheid regime warehouses, controls, and manages the remaining and unwanted population, slated for further displacement if and when the opportunity arises, a symptom of an undemocratic and racist state that covets another people's land without them in it. Finally, as early as 1895, Herzl wrote, "We should try to spirit the penniless Arab population across the borders by procuring employment for it in the transit countries, while denying while denying it any employment in our own country. Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly. The Zionists have succeeded in pushing the Palestinians out to the desert, to the sea, and internally into unlivable Bantustans, but have not killed the spirit or will to resist. Historical examples from South Africa and elsewhere are critical in this struggle because they show that ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and brutal force have never succeeded in halting the human spirit and yearning for liberation, freedom, and social justice. Thank you.